G'day everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Sean, this is RFD Hobby, and today's terrain tutorial we're going to be looking at making this fairly simple abandoned church here in two pieces. Now I'm making this building as I go, so there's not a lot of planning in place to start this one, but you'll see it comes together quite well. Hopefully you'll enjoy this video. Remember to like and subscribe if you do. If you have any comments or suggestions on how to improve this build, don't be shy, share them down below in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Let's get stuck into this build. Okay, so for the materials for this project, the main structure here is going to be using this single ply thin corrugated cardboard. Now I've just cut the sides identically and the front and back essentially the same. I think it's a 45-degree pitch on that roof. It doesn't really matter. The windows you can see I've cut there are very rough. The other material we're going to be using today is balsa wood. Now, not a lot of people have mentioned to me in the past that balsa wood is really expensive. I found these packs here at the local hammer barn. They're about $20, and there is a ton of pre-cut balsa in there for you. More than enough to do this build, and plenty left over for some extra stuff. So cutting these down, I'm just using some posts here to glue the corners in. I'm just using super glue for most of the build. There will be some white glue I use as well, but super glue is really quick. It works really well with balsa and cardboard. You just want to put these all in place and then start gluing the sides on. I use the grid on my mat here just to make sure that the corners are relatively square when you glue them and it dries. Don't want this to be too bent. We'll be able to fix up any minor issues when we put the base in. But you can see here I'm just putting the bead glue onto where the balsa is glued to the front there, and then we're just going to line up these sides and create ourselves a little box. Now this is really simple, like I said, with the super glue. It'll glue together really quickly and you'll be able to start moving on to putting the base in. Now I'm reinforcing all these joints with some white glue, some PVA glue here. This is just a little bit more flexible and it will give us a little bit more strength in the main structure. Now for the base here, I've just cut out a piece of cardboard that's going to slot straight into the bottom there, and we're just going to add some white glue, some PVA around the edges here, and probably put in a couple of pins. You might find that the sides aren't contacting perfectly with the base, so with using a couple of safety pins you can easily just press that in place. Now for the floor inside, I realized that it might be nice to have a couple of different little levels in there rather than just one flat floor. So I'm just going to use some cardboard pieces here, and I'm just going to glue that straight into the base. Nothing complicated about that. It's just I've just measured it so that I can be sure that the floorboards that I'm going to glue in there are going to fit. Now at this point I realized that it might be nice to have a little side building just built off the side of this church. So I've just got a little cardboard box, as you can see there, the white one, and I've just sort of cut it out to be a little bit of a rectangular shape, and then I've cut the hole in the side of our church here. I have sort of cut short here on everything. We'll go in and tidy it up and make sure that all the cuts are clean and everything fits perfectly. The floor, we're just going to replicate what we did on the larger building, and we're just going to cut a little piece of cardboard in there that's going to slot in there perfectly. A little bit of white glue to secure it in place, and then we can glue that straight to the side of the building. Now when it comes to the floor, for the inside I'm using paddle pop sticks or stirring sticks here. These are slightly larger and the scale looks pretty off, but at the end of the day this is still fine. It's the inside of the building, so I don't mind too much. Give everything a little bit of a primer just to bring the colors down so that I can start gluing on these floorboards, and I won't have large pieces of cardboard color showing through. So it doesn't really matter what color you use, as long as it's pretty dark. You'll be able to sort of fill in some of those gaps when we paint it anyway. Now as for the floorboards themselves, I'm just using different shapes, different lengths of floorboard here or paddle pop stick, and we're just going to glue this in just like you would expect any standard sort of floorboard to be. I'm not worried too much about the gaps. As you can see, there's a lot of gaps there. I've even twisted some of these craft sticks so that they do poke up slightly, and I am going to just go in and add in the floorboards across and in front of those raised levels I've put in there. Now the inside's also going to get some posts into these corners. This will work in two ways. It'll help the structural integrity somewhat, and it'll also look pretty cool. So we're just going to use this 1/4 inch balsa here. There's plenty of that in the pack that I bought. And what we're going to do is just build a little frame around the top of this structure as well. So this is where the roof is going to sit onto. So I will be building this in 2 parts, so there will be a removable roof for this. I haven't figured that all out at this stage of the project, but I know the basics of what I need. I need a small frame here that I can sit this roof onto and slide everything into. So once you've got those pieces cut, again, just some super glue to get those in place. These are not going to be coming out of the building at all, so this can be all just glued straight in onto our cardboard and onto our current structure. This will hold together everything pretty well, and we've got quite a bit more structural integrity into this thing now, and we can start looking at adding in some extra details. Now for these windows, these were probably a bit of a mistake in the build as far as they don't look very good. So I've used some chipboard cardboard here, which bends quite well, but it's really hard to cut curves into this cardboard, and I found that some of these windows were actually pretty rough, but it's okay, it's an abandoned church. I'm not too phased with it at this stage. I will be going in and doing another video down the track where I'll probably fix these up and clean them up a bit. As it comes to the inside and outside weatherboarding, all we're going to be using here is some very thin 1mm balsa, cutting it down into tiny little strips, and doing much like we did with the floorboards. We're just going to start gluing in different little pieces here to fill all these little gaps around the inside. Now again, you can see there's lots of gaps between these boards that I've put on. That's fine, as long as you've got a bit of primer coat behind it, those gaps will come out looking pretty cool. It'll look good in the final build. Now again, we're going to put some posts on the outside of the building here just to add a little bit of flavour, a little bit of variation to the outside of the building. And we're also going to build a little stairway or a little veranda on the front of this one, just for a little entryway. Now the great thing about balsa wood is you can easily break it, and in some cases it will stay in place. So you can see here I've just snapped it enough for it to be bent and broken, but not so much that it'll come away from the piece of wood. Now with this I can start building on the top, and again we're just going to add in, this is going to add in quite a bit of structural integrity to this front section. It's going to be fairly broken and worn down, but we're going to be using enough pieces here that it's going to sort of hold everything together and make sure that it doesn't just break away at some point. So the super glue works again very quickly. It's a really great way to build with this balsa wood because everything starts going on super quick and stuck down, and you can just move through different parts of this project really quickly. Alternatively, if you were using foam, for example, you would need to be using PVA or white glue, which is going to take significantly longer to dry. So being able to use some super glue in this case is really cool. Like I said, just helps you get through the project a lot quicker. And this is all, as I said at the start of the video, this is all made up as I go. So there's no real plan here. It's just a case of press fitting everything, you know, just eyeballing the measurements. And because you've got the balsa here, it's so easy to work with. If you make a small mistake, it's not much at all to just make up another piece and put it in place instead. And you can see with some of the roof and some of these pieces, if you break that balsa wood in the right way, it'll give you that really cool broken wood effect, which is really hard to get with foam. So there are some definite advantages to using balsa wood over foam in some of these builds, or for some of these elements of these builds. So keep that in mind in the future, and it's always good to have a little bit of balsa on hand. As you can see, this is coming up pretty well. I mean, once we get some colors on there, it'll look a lot better, but you just can't beat balsa wood for that natural wood effect. Now onto the roof here. Again, this is really just eyeballing all these measurements, gluing up a frame that'll fit in here that I can build off of. So I build one side up first with a little bit of glue, and from there we can start putting the whole structure of this roof together. At this stage, it's just going to be the two angles. We're not going to be worrying about our bell tower or anything like that. We're just going to be trying to make a frame that will sit in and come out of this structure really easily. With the super glue and some fairly rough cuts, I will admit, we will end up with just a simple frame structure like you can see here. I've glued in the cross beams as well. A lot of these are broken. There's nothing to that. Honestly, guys, it's just eyeballing those angles, cutting them, make sure it fits in there, and then super gluing it in place. Now, I did try to add an additional break into the the structure here. So I wanted the top peak of the roof to actually be broken around about halfway across, and in doing so it actually fell apart. So I broke the entire thing apart. I should have broke it before I put it all together and put the glue on, but I didn't, so I've had to come back here and actually glue most of this back together. It's no real problem. This is very easy to do. It only took me a couple of minutes to get this thing all back together. Now, as you can see here, it is in place. The roof comes off and sits back in very easily. There's no need, I think, for me to use magnets or anything for that. What I did want to do though here is I wanted to add some little posts, some foundation posts for this thing to sit on. Just wanted it a little bit up off the ground so I could put some stairs here as well. I just think it gives it you know, for a couple of little pieces of dowel there, it does add a little bit more to the building. So really easy to achieve a different effect just by cutting out a couple of little pieces. Now here I'm putting on the top, or what will be the base of the top. It's just cereal box cardboard cut to rough shape so that it fits on there. And here I'm just sort of marking out where the holes in this roof will be, and I'll cut that out of this cardboard, and then we can start looking at laying some shingles on here, and we're going to be leaving all the areas that we want exposed to be exposed, because we want to see some of these broken beams. We want to be able to see inside the structure itself, and we also want to allow in a fair bit of light so that it's not just all dark in there when you see it from the outside. So this works really well. Once you've got those holes cut, just super glue this straight on to your roof frame, and you can honestly make additional adjustments and cuts wherever you feel like you need them. I found cutting some of these and then sort of re-gluing them back down allowed you to add in some more angles, like you can see there. And this was the exact same process I used for the side building as well, just a small piece of cardboard cut out and glued on. Now for the bell tower, what I've made is this little sort of chair looking structure here, and what this does is it sits on the top and lines up with the front of the building. Now this will be attached purely to the roof, not to the actual structure itself. So all I'm doing is just building in the base around here, allowing for the pitch of that roof there as well, and we end up with this little piece here. You put a couple of little window sills on the top frame, and what you end up with is your little bell tower structure like this. We're going to put it together much like we did with the veranda at the front, just adding in some side supports there at the top. And now we're going to build in our pitched roof. I'm not really sure if this is the right way to do this, but it kind of worked. So I got some 1/4 inch balsa there, a little bit of super glue and some angle cuts. These are really rough eyeball because I couldn't sort of set this up and do any sort of practice fits. So if you just cut yourself out 1 or 2 pieces, get the angles rough, and then start sort of lining it up. Like I said, if you make a mistake here, or if you botch it up completely and it doesn't fit, just break it apart and do it again, and you should be able to eventually get yourself something that looks similar to this, and that will be the full structure that we need. So reinforce all your joints with a little bit of extra glue. You can use white glue if you want to really make sure it's going to stay together. But this bell tower, as you can see here, is now completed. It's really rough, but we're looking at an abandoned building here, so it doesn't need to be perfect. All it needs to do is fit perfect. So we just want to make sure that when we glue it down, like I said, it's not attached to the front of the building at all. It just glues onto the roof itself. Adding the base structure for our roof and shingles here is really simple. Just some more cereal box cardboard, cut into the right shapes to sit and glue in there. And we just go over with some prime just to get the white from there. And here's one of my first mistakes in trying to create a little bit of a shortcut for this build. I thought I'd try and do these shingles in sheets of shingles like this, as you can see. Now this process is a perfectly good process to use. It does allow you to be a little bit quicker with the build. What I found though was once I put all this on and I started looking at it, I realized these shingles were too big. The scale looked off. I wasn't happy with it. So I just peeled them all away and started again. Now the downside to that is having to do smaller shingles means using little strips of balsa. It's really difficult because it doesn't split. When you're using such small strips, it's really hard to split those without cutting right through. So I've just decided to, you know what, stuff it. I'm going to do much like I did on the Monster House build, and I'm going to individually glue each of these shingles in place. Now I know this sounds daunting and you can look at the build and think there's no way I would spend the time to do that, but it really doesn't take very long. It doesn't take a lot of materials either. The glue, it looks like I'm using tons of it, but it's not so bad. You just start putting these in place, overlapping from the bottom to the top to make sure it all makes sense. And once they're in place, you just do need to give this a fair bit of time to dry because we're using the white glue here instead of the super glue, which is my preferred method for this, honestly. Otherwise you're going to be using stacks of super glue and it's a really shitty thing to work with on such a small scale. So if you're picking up pieces and putting them down, it's much easier to have white glue on your fingers than it is to have super glue on your fingers. This is probably the best way to do it, I'd say. The entire process for putting these shingles on probably took me 2 to 3 hours, so whilst it's not a real quick way to go about it, it looks spot on as far as I'm concerned. So I'm really happy with how this turns out. You can be very creative with the layout for the shingles as far as where the roof's collapsed. I'll be using a fair bit of this for rubble on the floor in a later video. For the cap on the roof pitch there, I'm just using some cereal box cardboard cut into little squares or rectangles. They don't have to be perfectly shaped, and we're just going to be overlapping them again, starting from the outside, working our way in. And for this I'm going to be using super glue just because the cereal box cardboard tends not to hold its shape very well, so you might glue it all on, but it'll start to bend and warp a bit if you use the white glue. Super glue will be so quick that it'll just dry it in the spot you want it to be. So here you can see the build is now fully completed. The only things left are some gaps I've got to fill, and then I can start thinking about adding in additional details. Now the gaps at the front and rear of the building are pretty significant. I wasn't anticipating this, but luckily it was a really easy and quick fix, and it actually works pretty well for the build overall. It doesn't affect the roof going on or coming off, but it definitely fixes that gap and makes the whole thing look 10 times better having those gaps filled. So nothing complicated about that. All the angles and measurements were pretty much eyeballed and marked out, but here you can see the whole thing is now, the build itself is now completed. We've got a lot of work to do on painting and adding additional details. I will be doing that in a future video, however, as this one has already gone significantly longer than I would have liked. But hopefully you found something in this video that you can use in your own projects. I highly recommend balsa wood as a material to use. It's just fantastic. If you haven't tried it before, just try and get yourself a little bit and play around with it. You'll find it is fantastic for getting a wood effect, and there's a lot you can do with it that you can't do with foam, so it's well worth having a bit of that on hand. Now I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to like and subscribe if you do. If you'd like to check out more of my videos, you can check out the playlist I've got linked here. Remember to like and subscribe. Check out my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel, and I will see you guys in the next video.